The silence that screamed inside me, anxiety and the invisible chaos of the human mind. On the outside, he seemed calm, but no one could imagine the noise echoing inside his mind. While everyone saw silence, anxiety was tearing his human mind apart from the inside, like a scream that no one else could hear. But that night, something happened. The silence didn't just scream, it answered. And it was then that he realized that perhaps he was no longer alone within his own mind. The silence he pretended to control. He always believed that silence was a refuge, a space where he could finally breathe without being pressured by the demands of the world. But while everyone saw only calm outside, something inside him began to stir. Anxiety, silent as a predator, moved within his human mind with slow, calculated steps. At first, it was just a slight discomfort, like a whisper lost at the end of an empty corridor. He ignored it. He pretended there was nothing there. But the silence, it was never truly silence. It was just the surface of a turbulent sea that he avoided facing. Every time he closed his eyes, he felt a strange weight, as if something were watching his thoughts. And the more he tried to escape, the more he realized that perhaps the silence wasn't there to protect him, but rather to hide him from what was truly about to emerge from within him. The human mind begins to crack. As the days passed, he began to notice small cracks in his own perception. Nothing glaring, nothing obvious, just details that escaped his control, as if his human mind had begun to silently crack. Anxiety, once discreet, now pulsed in irregular waves, invading his thoughts at the most unexpected moments. Simple things, like looking at the clock or hearing the sound of a door, became triggers that echoed within him with disproportionate intensity. It was as if the whole world was slightly misaligned, out of place. He tried to argue with himself, to rationalize, to take a deep breath, but nothing seemed to convince that inner chaos to retreat. It was only the beginning, a subtle phase of mental noise. But, for him, it was already enough to realize that something bigger and much darker was approaching, scratching at the invisible walls of his own mind, asking to get out. The sound that didn't exist, but he heard it. It was on a seemingly ordinary morning that something different began to manifest. He woke up with the feeling that there was a constant sound in the back of his head. It wasn't exactly a noise, nor a voice. It was like a distant echo, something that shouldn't exist. Anxiety, which had previously hidden in the shadows of his human mind, now seemed to want to communicate. He stopped, held his breath, trying to understand. But there was nothing in his surroundings that justified that persistent murmur. It was internal, deep, almost organic. The more he tried to ignore it, the stronger it became, vibrating among his thoughts like a silent warning. He began to fear that perhaps he wasn't just hearing, but being heard. It was as if something inside him was knocking on the door of consciousness, asking for entry. And at that moment, he realized that perhaps he was about to discover that the worst part of silence is when it starts to make noise. The invisible weight that began to press him down. As the days passed, the inner sound didn't disappear. On the contrary, it seemed to take shape, to become denser, as if it had weight. He began to feel a constant pressure in his head, a tightness that didn't come from his body, but from his own human mind. Anxiety manifested itself as something pushing from the inside out, trying to distort his thoughts. The sensation was strange. It wasn't pain, but a discomfort that spread slowly, like invisible hands pressing against his temples. He tried to act normally, to follow his routine, to talk, to smile, but everything seemed to require too much effort. The world around him became more distant, almost muffled, as if he were seeing his life through thick glass. The more he tried to concentrate, the more he realized that his mind wasn't responding as before. It was as if something was watching him from within, silent, patient, waiting for the right moment to take control. And he knew this wasn't just tiredness. It was a warning. When the body obeys, but the mind goes astray. It was then that he began to notice something even more disturbing. His body continued to function, but his human mind seemed to act on its own. He performed simple tasks, washing his hands, opening a door, walking, but meanwhile, strange thoughts arose without him summoning them. Anxiety was no longer just an uncomfortable presence. Now it assumed the role of narrator within him, commenting on every gesture, every breath, every second. Sometimes, in the middle of a common action, he had the sensation of distancing himself from himself, as if observing his own body acting from afar. Nothing seemed real, everything sounded blurry. It was like walking inside a dream where everything is too silent, but at the same time, threatening. He realized that his mind was beginning to take paths he hadn't chosen, as if testing how much control he could still achieve. And this silent warning was, of all, the most terrifying. The shadows he never saw, but felt. As the internal turmoil progressed, something new began to emerge. These weren't complete visions, nor defined images, but sensations, subtle presences that hovered on the edge of perception. He didn't see anything exactly, but he felt it. Anxiety, now rooted within his human mind, seemed to create shapeless figures, shadows that followed his gaze without ever revealing themselves. Sometimes, turning his head quickly, he swore he perceived something moving at the edge of his vision. Other times, it was simply the irrational certainty that he wasn't alone in his own thoughts. It was as if the air around him had gained consciousness, observing every gesture, every hesitation. These moments were brief, yet profound enough to freeze his chest. He tried to convince himself it was just tiredness, just stress, but something inside him knew the truth. Those shadows didn't come from outside. They came from within, and they were becoming bolder. The mirror that reflected a stranger. It was in front of the mirror that he realized how much he no longer recognized himself. The reflection showed the same face, the same eyes, but there was something different. A distance, a strangeness that made him feel as if he were looking at another person. Anxiety, now deeply ingrained in his human mind, distorted his perception, creating fissures between who he was and who he believed himself to be. The smile seemed false, the gestures mechanical, as if his body were merely a puppet obeying invisible commands. He approached the glass, trying to find some trace of familiarity, but the more he stared, the more he felt the reflection watching him back, judging, questioning, almost mocking. It was as if the mirror reflected not only his image, but also the inner chaos he tried to hide. And in that instant he understood, it wasn't the world that was changing. It was him. And perhaps there was no turning back. The dead-end labyrinth inside the head. Over time, his mind ceased to be merely a space for thoughts and began to transform into a labyrinth. Each idea seemed to open a new door, but none led to the exit. Anxiety, now sovereign within his human mind, guided his steps through endless corridors, where each turn revealed only more confusion. He tried to cling to memories, to certainties, but everything dissolved like smoke. It was like walking in circles, always returning to the same point, always trapped in the same emptiness. The silence, once a refuge, had become a constant echo, repeating his doubts until they multiplied. The most frightening thing was not being lost. It was realizing that perhaps there would never be a way back. And the more he sought a way out, the more the labyrinth expanded, as if it were alive, growing along with the fear. He understood, then, that he was not only trapped. He was being observed by the labyrinth itself. The clock that was telling the wrong time. It was while looking at the clock that he realized time no longer followed the same rhythm. The hands moved, but each second seemed to last an eternity, while others simply vanished without a trace. Anxiety, now sovereign within his human mind, distorted his perception of time as if to prove that nothing was under control. The ticking wasn't just sound, it was a cruel reminder that the world moved on, but he remained trapped in an internal cycle where each instant multiplied into chaotic thoughts. Sometimes, he believed the clock was watching him, mocking his inability to keep up. Other times, he felt the hands turning in opposite directions, as if time were broken. And in that instant, he understood, it wasn't just time that was out of sync. It was him, fragmented, living at a pace no one else could hear. The body that no longer belonged to him. It was at this point that the disconnection became almost unbearable. His body still obeyed basic commands, walking, breathing, holding objects, but it no longer seemed to belong to him. Anxiety, now completely infiltrated his human mind, transformed every gesture into something strange, as if controlled by an external force. He would raise his hand and, for a moment, have the feeling that it wasn't his. Touch, movement, everything seemed distant, as if he were living inside a borrowed body. This alienation grew silently, corroding his identity, until he began to wonder if he was still the same as before. The most frightening thing wasn't losing physical control, but realizing that his mind no longer recognized his own body as home. It was as if he were being expelled from himself, slowly, without resistance, merely watching the process of becoming a stranger within his own skin. The whisper that didn't come from outside. It was on a silent night that he realized the sounds no longer belonged to the outside world. There was no wind, no voices, nothing, and yet, a persistent whisper echoed inside his head. It wasn't loud, it wasn't clear, but it was there, constant, as if someone were speaking in secret just to him. Anxiety, now completely ingrained in his human mind, seemed to have found a new way to manifest itself, no longer as noise, but as language. He tried to distinguish words, but everything dissolved into incomplete murmurs, like sentences cut in half. The most disturbing thing was the feeling that he wasn't listening, but being called. The whisper wasn't just seeking attention, it was seeking an answer. And, at that moment, he understood that the silence wasn't empty. It was a hidden conversation, taking place within himself, waiting for him to finally agree to participate. The abyss that called him by name. It was when the whisper turned into a call that he realized there was no way to ignore it anymore. It wasn't just a sound, it was a faceless, originless voice that seemed to know every detail of his human mind. Anxiety, now full and dominant, no longer hid. It summoned him, drawing him into an inner space that had no floor or walls, only emptiness. This abyss was not physical, but psychological, a place where all his doubts and fears gathered in chorus. He felt as if he were on the edge of something immense, about to plummet, and the most disturbing thing was the feeling that the abyss recognized him, called him by name, as if it were tailor-made for him. There was no escape, no silence that could protect him. Only the certainty that, by answering the call, he might never again be who he believed himself to be. When silence finally screamed. That night, everything became unbearably clear. The silence, which had previously been merely a disguise, exploded within him like a scream that could no longer be contained. Anxiety, now absolute, no longer hid in the shadows of the human mind. It revealed itself in its rawest form, like a chaos that demanded to be heard. There were no more fissures, no more murmurs. It was an internal roar, a collapse that made each thought collide with the other, like waves in a storm. He felt he was no longer alone within himself. Something had responded, something had awakened. The silence was not empty, it never had been. It was a patient monster, waiting for the right moment to show itself. And when it finally screamed, he realized he wasn't fighting against the external world, but against the entire universe that existed within his own mind.